Okay, this is from quotes of Lord Byron. It's from this book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom, quotes by Meepy Rogers. Okay, so Lord Byron, he lived from 1788 to 1824. So this was the Romantic age of poetry. And the Romanticism was sort of a backlash movement in response to the earlier repressiveness of the Protestant Puritanism, which was big in England. I have a big distaste of that, like Cromwell, who was brutal to the Irish. And then the Enlightenment, hyper-rationality, where they thought they knew everything and they didn't need God, which led to all the disasters in France, like in the late 1700s. And, Byron would be very familiar with that. Lord Byron was very good friends with Percy Bysshe Shelley. They were sort of these good-looking, young, rich aristocrats that were both great at poetry, and they were like rock and roll stars of their day. They could have any woman they want. They could sleep with 3 women at the same time, and they often did that sort of thing. Byron's reputation was that he was mad, bad, and dangerous. He was an aristocrat Englishman, but of Scottish descent. And when you look into him, and you look into the early beginnings of feminism, they were right in the middle of all this. There was like a Mary Wollstonecraft in the 1700s, and then her daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, she was in the middle of all this early feminism. The woman wanting to be more independent. But there was a problem with it. Wherever you hear about feminism, you also simultaneously will then hear about free love, a lot of promiscuity, and then the next thing you're always going to hear about is a bunch of dead babies. Okay, in the modern world, they have one after another abortion. Back in those days, they would have abortions or the babies would die. They'd be neglected. They wouldn't want the baby. It was quite a disaster. And it was a big scandal in those days. They didn't have any birth control. But as you look more closely at it, there was a lot about it that was just kind of evil. Both Percy Bysshe Shelley and Byron, in my opinion, were scumbags. I mean, they were very bad to these women. A lot of these women, it was just miserably. You see dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, and other disasters. Suicide. It was a big mess. And Goethe later had said, classicism is health and romanticism is sickness. And that's the way. It would be like having your kid. You don't want your kid hanging around with a bunch of rock and roll or drug addicts. Okay, and that's what they were the equivalent for their time. I think they were quite bad. And I'm also going to tell you, if you study feminism, and I recently read about it to understand more about it. Wasn't reading directly about feminism, but I ended up doing so. It's so evil you don't even understand it. You guys don't even understand what feminism is. Feminism comes out of Satanism. The idea that the original devil at the beginning of the Bible was not an adversary to Eve, but a friend, okay, and that he was respecting her intelligence to talk about the tree of good and evil and knowledge, okay, and it just goes from there. And then after World War I, feminism got kind of taken over by the communist movement, okay, and feminism basically is a fake movement. That's what Ayn Rand had described it as. It's fake. It pretends to be one thing, but what it really is communism, and it's an opportunity to defund all the men. Okay, what they want to do, let's say you want to destroy a country, you feminize it so it can't defend itself. And then what you also do is take away money from men, take away power from men. The more you can feminize it, the easier it is to control. The idea of communists is that women are very easy to control. All you have to do is give them some emotional nonsense and they'll believe it, and then you can get them to do whatever you want. So they always want to favor women over men because they think the more power women have in a society relative to men, the weaker the society, the easier it is to force it into to slavery, to open up its down south, like its borders, that sort of thing. That's what the attitude of is. You can get them to be sentimental, just give them some sentimental story and they'll believe it. And the other thing is, according to the psychology books, if you're reading about communism, they believe that women are much more conformist. Like a woman cares a lot more what the other women think of her and her thoughts than a guy typically would. So they can pressure them all to be kind of conformist. Like with the TV show The View, for example. Oh, we must do what Whoopi says. Okay, what Whoopi says. Okay, so, but what I'm trying to say is this is not by accident. It's not by accident that divorce totally favors the woman over the man, because it wants more divorces to happen to weaken the country. It wants children to be raised by a woman instead of a man. When they're raised by a woman, children, they need their mommy more when they're young, but as they get older, they need more of the man's objective, just harsh reality. Mommy's unconditional love is essential at many times in life, but the father's sort of objective reality. Look, pal, nobody cares about you. You're just going to have to work all day. Get used to it, okay? That's valuable for a kid to hear that. And as a man, you learn to control your impulses better. Women don't control impulses as well as men do because they don't have to. A woman can cry, it's okay. She's sad. A woman can throw things and yell and scream, it's okay. It's that time of the month. Oh, look at her. She's in a bad mood. It's a big joke. A man can't do that. If a man cries, he's a wuss and he loses respect. If a man, gets all loud and throws things, then he's violent and he gets in trouble. Okay, so a guy has to keep an emotional range real narrow, whereas a woman's emotional range is like this, and a woman could be like a roller coaster. If you look at the brain of a woman on an MRI, she's got this big honking pituitary with this convex upper surface, a premenopausal woman. The man's pituitary is about half the size with a flat upper surface. I can immediately look at a midline sagittal brain MRI and know that's a man, that's a woman. Okay, premenopausal woman versus a man. It's easy. And that's really the only thing. All that stuff about the big corpus callosum, that's not readily identifiable. I can't tell that. And I've looked at many thousands of them. Okay, so getting back to Lord Byron. He was sort of evil in a lot of ways. He would, abandon pregnant women. He would deliberately seek out married women and destroy their families with adultery. He would drink a lot, gamble a lot, have all kinds of debts. He had very little respect for other people. His memoirs were considered so bad that after his death, his friends burned them rather than let the public know more of the bad truth about him. He was, despite the fact he was an Englishman, he was a big fan of Napoleon, while French was, fighting with the Duke of Wellington in England. So the Duke of Wellington, as you can imagine, didn't really like that too much. He was a good-looking guy. He had some problems. He had a club foot, and he was a genius for rhyming poetry. Some of his poetry is a lot of fun, and I've read some of it. But him and Shelley were both like that. They were both sort of sick in the head, and they both, Shelley in particular was full of all this satanic BS. Let's see what else. So here's what Duke Wellington said. The head guy in England. He said, "I hate the whole race of poets. There is no believing a word they say. Your professional poets. I mean, there never existed a more worthless group than Byron and his friends." I think that was actually pretty well said. His poetry is not that good. It's a little bit like sort of a bawdy ballad, to sing at a bar or something. A lot of little cute rhymes. A drop of ink may make a million think. The best prophet of the future is the prophet of the past. Monarch of mountains, they crowned him long ago on a throne of rocks in a robe of clouds with a diadem of snow. A lot of type of rhymes like that. Let's see. My favorite poem by Byron was, the classic, "She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." He did do some good things. He sort of volunteered to go help Greece fight for freedom, so that was sort of a noble, romantic thing to do. Let me see. A couple good quotes here and there. But overall, I'm not a big fan of Byron. I include him almost for historical interest, so you've heard of him and you know about him. And so, the schools tend to glamorize people like Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley. But when you look at them closely and you read more about their lives, they were both a couple of jerks. And you wouldn't like them if you knew them, and they would be troublemakers. They did a lot of bad things to a lot of people. So anyways, that's it for Lord Byron.